They say the smallest moments can carry the heaviest weight, and sometimes a simple act of kindness opens the door to a story so heartbreaking it leaves even the strongest among us in tears. This is one of those stories. Welcome to Stories of Hope, where we share real, powerful stories that remind us just how much humanity still exists in the world. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. It was a cold, gray afternoon in Chicago, the kind where the wind cuts through your coat no matter how thick it is, and the sidewalks glisten with patches of half-melted snow. Inside the busy downtown streets, people rushed about, ducking into warm cafes, holiday lights twinkling behind frosty windows. But outside the large display window of Mason's toy store, a little girl stood still. She couldn't have been older than 8. Her coat was threadbare, too small for her, and didn't button up all the way. Her shoes were worn, the soles nearly separating. She stood there, frozen, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Her eyes were locked on a beautiful doll displayed in the center of the window. It wore a lavender dress, had shiny black hair, and a smile painted with so much care, it looked almost real. Tears quietly streamed down the little girl's cheeks. She wasn't sobbing, she wasn't making a sound, just standing there, crying silently. That's what caught Thomas Reed's attention. Thomas was a retired firefighter in his late 60s, a big man with hands rough from years of service, but eyes that had seen too much pain to ignore it. He had been on his way to meet his daughter for coffee when he passed by the toy store. At first, he nearly walked right past her, assuming she was waiting for someone, but something made him stop, something in the way she was staring at that doll, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. He stepped closer and gently said, "Sweetheart, are you lost?" The girl flinched slightly, wiped her face with the sleeve of her coat, and looked up. Her eyes were a striking blue, but red from crying. She shook her head slowly. "No, sir," she said softly. "I'm not lost." Thomas crouched down beside her carefully. "You all right?" She didn't answer at first, then she nodded again, that kind of nod kids give when they're trying to act brave. He looked through the window again, then back at her. "That doll in the window, is that why you're out here in the cold?" She nodded, then added, "My sister, she would have loved her." There was something about the way she said it, past tense, would have. Thomas felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He didn't push, he just stood up and smiled a little. "Well, I think that doll's just waiting for the right person to take her home," he said. "How about we go inside and see if she's still available?" The girl's eyes widened and she shook her head quickly. "No, I can't. I don't have money. I was just looking." Thomas looked around. People were passing by, barely noticing. He gave a small laugh, trying to lighten the air. "I didn't ask if you had money. I asked if you wanted to go in." After a long pause, the girl gave a tiny nod. Thomas opened the door, and the little bell above chimed as the warm air rushed out to greet them. She stepped in slowly, like she was afraid it was a trick, but Thomas stayed beside her. Inside, the smell of new toys, plastic, and cinnamon candles filled the air. Shelves were lined with teddy bears, trucks, puzzles, and dolls of every kind. But the girl walked straight to the window display, carefully reaching up toward the doll. A store clerk smiled as Thomas approached the register. "A gift for your granddaughter?" he asked cheerfully. Thomas hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the girl who was now gently cradling the doll like it was made of glass. Something like that. He bought the doll and brought it over. The girl didn't say anything. She just stared at it as he handed it to her. Then, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "Thank you, but can I tell you something?" "Of course," Thomas said gently. "Anything." The little girl looked down at the doll, then back up at Thomas, her lip trembling. "She looks just like my sister, but my sister's not here anymore. She passed away last week. She was only 6. Thomas's breath caught. "I didn't get to say goodbye," she said. "She got real sick, and I promised her I'd get her a doll for Christmas. She never had one. Mama said we didn't have enough, but I told her I would get one, somehow, even if I had to stand outside until someone listened." Her voice broke on the last word, and suddenly, this man who had faced burning buildings, who had seen loss, chaos, pain, felt tears welling in his own eyes. He knelt down, carefully placing a hand on the girl's shoulder, and whispered, "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ellie," she whispered. "Well, Ellie, I think your sister would be really proud of you, and I know she's listening." That's when Thomas broke. The weight of what this child had carried, the cold, the silence, the grief, it hit him all at once. He pulled her into a hug, not saying anything more. People around the store had stopped. Some watched, some wiped their own eyes. No one spoke. For the first time in days, Ellie let herself cry. Not the silent, controlled tears she'd been holding in, but the deep, heartbroken sobs that only come when someone finally makes you feel safe enough to let go. And in that toy store, on a cold December afternoon, a stranger and a little girl held each other, bound not by blood, but by pain, by kindness, and by a promise that even in the darkest moments, compassion still exists. But that was just the beginning. Ellie had nowhere else to go that day. And Thomas, he couldn't just walk away after that. What happened next would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Thomas didn't ask questions right away. After they left the toy store, Ellie still clutched the doll close to her chest, as if it was the last fragile thing connecting her to her sister. The streets were still bitterly cold, and Thomas could feel the sharp bite of the wind even through his thick coat. He looked down at the little girl beside him, quiet, trembling, and far too thin for a child her age. "You eaten anything today, Ellie?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "We ran out of food yesterday." Thomas swallowed hard. "Where's your mom now?" There was a pause. Ellie didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "She's at the shelter. The one down by 8th, but they didn't let me in because there wasn't space." Thomas stopped walking. "You were out here all night?" She looked up, tears returning. "I stayed by the bakery. The warm air comes from the vent. I didn't want to sleep, but I was so tired." Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. He felt something heavy pressing down on him. Guilt, sadness, maybe even anger. Not at her, not even at her mother, but at the world that had let this happen. A child, grieving, freezing, and alone with no one to notice. "All right," he said quietly. "First thing, let's get you something warm to eat. Then we'll figure the rest out." They found a diner just around the corner, a quiet place where the waitress greeted them with a tired smile. Thomas ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup for Ellie and a coffee for himself. The waitress brought the food quickly, and Ellie devoured it like she hadn't eaten properly in days. She paused only to keep glancing at the doll seated beside her in the booth. Thomas watched her, sipping his coffee slowly. He didn't want to rush anything. She was still a stranger, after all, a little girl with a story that was only starting to unfold. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to leave her out in that cold again. When she finished eating, he reached into his wallet and pulled out an old photo. It was a picture of his daughter, Laura, when she was about Ellie's age. "You remind me of her," he said quietly. Ellie leaned over, curious. "Where is she now?" "She's grown," he smiled faintly. "Has 2 boys of her own, lives across town. We talk most days, but you know how life goes. People get busy." Ellie nodded, though her understanding of busy was different. Her whole life had been full of silence, not bustle. "I'm sorry about your sister," Thomas said after a pause. Ellie looked down again. "Her name was Lily. She got sick real fast. Mama said it was pneumonia, but we didn't have money to take her to a good doctor. The free clinic gave her medicine, but it didn't work." She stopped talking, and her little fingers gripped the edge of the table. She was coughing a lot. She couldn't breathe at the end. Thomas couldn't hold back the tears this time. He turned his head slightly, wiping them away discreetly. He had spent his life running into burning buildings, dragging people out of wreckage, seeing things most couldn't imagine. But nothing prepared him for the sight of a child grieving the way Ellie was. "Do you want to go find your mama?" he asked gently. Ellie nodded. "But I don't want to go back to the shelter if they won't let me in." "We'll figure it out," he promised. "You won't be out here again." The shelter on 8th Street wasn't much. A converted warehouse with a long line of tired faces waiting outside, mostly women and children. Thomas walked up to the volunteer at the front and explained that he was looking for a woman named Carol, Ellie's mother. The volunteer hesitated. "We had a Carol come in last night. She was worried sick about her daughter, said she'd gone missing. We thought she was with a relative." "She's been outside all night," Thomas said firmly. "Where is she now?" The woman disappeared into the building and returned a few minutes later with a thin, pale woman wrapped in a donated coat. Her face lit up the second she saw Ellie. She rushed forward, tears falling before she even spoke. "Ellie!" she cried, dropping to her knees and pulling her into a hug. "Oh, my baby! I thought you were gone." "I'm sorry, Mama," Ellie whispered. "I was just trying to get Lily a doll." Thomas watched as they clung to each other, sobbing. For a long while, no one said anything. Then Carol looked up at him, confusion and gratitude written across her face. Who are you?" "My name's Thomas," he said quietly. "Just a man who happened to be walking by." Carol's lip trembled. Thank you for finding her, for feeding her, for caring." Thomas nodded, but his mind was already racing. This woman was clearly struggling. The shelter didn't have room for Ellie last night. What would happen tonight? What about the next day? He pulled the volunteer aside. "Is there no way they can stay together?" "We're full," she said apologetically, "but if she can check in early tomorrow, we might get them a spot for a few nights." It wasn't enough. Thomas spent the night in his small apartment, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. He couldn't shake the image of Ellie curled up by a bakery vent, clutching a doll meant for a sister she had lost. He kept wondering, what if he hadn't walked by that toy store? Morning came, and with it, a decision. He didn't tell his daughter right away. He didn't call anyone. He just showed up at the shelter again and found Carol and Ellie waiting in line. "I've got a spare room," he said softly. "You don't have to stay here, not unless you want to." Carol stared at him. Why would you do that for us?" Thomas hesitated, then simply said, "Because once, a long time ago, someone did the same for me, and I never forgot it." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Some pain doesn't need a full backstory to be understood. Carol agreed, hesitantly. She was scared. Anyone would be. But she could tell Thomas wasn't a threat. He was a man carrying a different kind of burden. And right now, he was offering something she hadn't had in years, a safe place to rest. So they followed him home. What none of them knew then was how deeply this one decision would change everything. Because under Thomas's roof, Ellie would begin to heal. But so would Thomas. And Carol, she would face a past she thought she'd buried forever. And the secrets that started to unravel would bring more truth, pain, and hope than anyone expected. The first night under Thomas's roof was quiet, almost too quiet. Ellie had fallen asleep on the couch before dinner even ended, the doll still tucked tightly beneath her arm. Carol sat at the edge of the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, her eyes darting from corner to corner like she didn't quite believe she was in someone's home, in safety. Thomas moved slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. He set out clean sheets, gave her the room that once belonged to his late wife, and let her know there was no rush to explain anything. Still, as the clock ticked on and the silence grew heavier, Carol finally spoke. "She was fine one day," she said softly. "Lily, running around, singing to herself like she always did. Then she got a cough. That's all it was, just a cough." Her voice cracked. "I took her to the clinic. They gave us pills, but she got worse, fast. I begged for help, but nobody listened. They said the hospital was full, that there were others sicker." Thomas sat across from her, listening. Every word felt like a needle threading into old wounds he'd tried to stitch up years ago. Carol wiped her face with the back of her hand. "The night she died, I held her the whole time. Ellie was sleeping on the floor, and I didn't even wake her up to say goodbye. I just sat there, rocking Lily in my arms until morning. She looked up. I've been running ever since, trying to find a way to keep Ellie fed, warm, anything. I've worked odd jobs, but they don't last. I'm not a bad mum. I swear I'm not." Thomas didn't flinch. "I know you're not." There was something about the way she told the truth, plainly, without excuses, that struck him. He didn't see a failure. He saw someone who'd tried, again and again, with no help, no safety net. And now, she'd finally found a stranger willing to listen. Over the next few days, life settled into something that resembled calm. Thomas cooked simple meals. Carol offered to clean, wash dishes, do laundry. Ellie followed him around the house sometimes, quiet at first, but slowly warming up. She liked to ask about the photos on the walls, pictures of Thomas in his fireman's gear, his wife in the garden, a young girl in braces smiling from ear to ear. "That's Laura," he'd say, "my daughter." "Do you miss her?" Ellie asked once, tracing the frame with her little fingers. Thomas paused. "Every day." She nodded like she understood, then whispered, "I miss Lily every day too." One afternoon, Thomas sat down with Ellie and showed her how to build a model airplane. Her tiny hands fumbled with the parts, and she got glue on the table, but the laughter that followed was something he hadn't heard in years. Carol watched from the hallway, her eyes soft with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. But just as things started to feel safe, the past came knocking. It was a cold Thursday morning when Thomas went to the market, leaving Carol and Ellie home alone. While he was gone, there was a knock at the door. Carol opened it, assuming it was him. Instead, a man stood there, tall, rough, and instantly familiar. "Carol," he said with a crooked grin, "took me a while to find you." Her face went white. It was Mark, Ellie's father, a man she had left behind years ago when his drinking turned violent, the man who had once raised a hand to her and nearly struck Ellie when she was barely 2. She'd fled in the night with nothing but a backpack and 2 daughters clinging to her arms. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smirked. "Heard through someone you were living with some old man. Thought maybe you finally found a sugar daddy." "Get out," she said. "Not without my daughter," he replied. Carol stepped in front of the living room. "She's not yours. You never wanted her. You don't get to decide that." Before she could respond, Thomas returned, grocery bags in hand, confusion turning quickly to alarm. One look at Carol's face told him everything. He set the bags down slowly and stepped between her and the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked calmly. Mark's eyes flicked to Thomas. Who the hell are you? This is my house, Thomas said flatly, and I'm going to ask you once to leave. Don't make me ask again. Mark scoffed. You think you can keep her from me? I've got rights. You've got a record, Carol snapped. I still have the police report. You went to jail, Mark. You don't just get to show up after 6 years and pretend you're a father. Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just stepped forward and said quietly, I'm giving you 1 minute to walk away, or I'll call the police. And if you so much as try to touch that girl, I swear to God, I'll make sure you regret it. Mark hesitated. There was something in Thomas's tone, not loud, but solid, unmovable, that made him think twice. After a long pause, he turned on his heel and walked away, muttering curses under his breath. Thomas shut the door behind him, locking it. Carol stood frozen, her hands shaking. He found us. Thomas didn't try to comfort her with false promises. He simply said, He's not coming back. Not if I can help it. That night, Carol cried in the kitchen. Quiet, exhausted sobs. She thought she'd buried that chapter of her life. But it had come back, like a shadow stretching over everything she'd built since. Thomas sat beside her, not saying much, just being there. I didn't mean to bring trouble into your life, she said between tears. You didn't, he said gently. You brought Ellie. You brought honesty. That's not trouble. In the days that followed, Thomas helped Carol start the paperwork for a restraining order. He contacted a legal aid group, explained the situation, and even offered to cover the filing fees. He didn't ask for thanks. He just did what needed to be done. But inside, something was shifting. He had lived a long time in a quiet house, surrounded by ghosts. And now, suddenly, there was noise again. Life again. Ellie's giggles in the morning, Carol's humming while folding laundry, the scent of toast and jam in the kitchen. And somewhere deep in that house, somewhere near the room with the old family photos and forgotten memories, warmth was returning. But not all wounds stay closed. And sometimes, to move forward, you have to confront the pain you thought you'd already left behind. In part 4, as Thomas uncovers more about Carol's past and Ellie discovers something hidden in her sister's doll, a powerful truth will come to light, one that changes all their lives forever. A few weeks had passed since Mark showed up at Thomas's door. The days had grown colder, but inside the little home, life had started to feel warmer. Ellie began humming again. Carol smiled more, and Thomas. He found himself listening for their voices, missing them even when they left the room for a moment. It was one quiet Saturday morning when Ellie came padding into the living room, her doll tucked under her arm as always. But this time, she looked confused, even a little worried. Mr. Thomas? She asked softly. Can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. What is it? She held up the doll, Lily's doll, and turned it over in her hands. There's something inside. Thomas leaned forward. Inside the doll? She nodded. I thought I heard it crinkle when I squeezed her tummy. With Carol still asleep in the guest room, Thomas took the doll gently and examined it. Sure enough, there was a faint rustling sound. Carefully, he turned it over, found a small seam that had come loose near the back, and gently reached inside. His fingers closed around a folded piece of paper, worn and yellowed like it had been hidden for years. He looked at Ellie. You sure you want to see what's in here? She nodded, eyes wide. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, done in pencil. As he read the first line, his breath caught. It was from Lily. Dear Mommy, if I don't wake up tomorrow, please don't be sad. I know you love me, and I love you and Ellie too. I'm not scared. I just want you to know you're the best mom in the world. And I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. Tell Ellie she's my best friend. Love, Lily. Thomas sat in silence for a moment, staring at the letter. Ellie looked up at him. "What does it say?" He didn't speak at first. He just reached out, pulled her into his arms, and held her. She didn't ask again. She didn't need to. She felt the weight in his embrace. Later, when Carol came into the kitchen and saw Thomas at the table with the letter in front of him, she froze. He looked up at her, eyes misty. "Did you know this was in there?" She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. I had no idea." She sat down slowly, touching the paper like it might break apart beneath her fingers. And when she read the words, she wept. Deep, aching sobs that came from somewhere years away, from hospital floors and sleepless nights, from whispered goodbyes that had never felt complete. But this small message tucked inside a doll, it was as if Lily had reached back through time just to say, "It's okay." That moment changed something. Carol finally let go of the guilt she'd been carrying, not because the pain disappeared, but because Lily had left her permission to live, truly live, without it. And for Thomas, the letter stirred memories he'd buried deep. He walked out to the shed that evening, rummaged through boxes until he found an old photo album. He sat on the porch with Carol and Ellie, sharing stories of Laura, his daughter, the girl who'd loved painting butterflies on her jeans and used to sit in that very same spot, giggling over fireflies. That night, they were no longer three strangers clinging to what they'd lost. They were something else now. A man whose home had once been too quiet, a mother who had been running too long, and a little girl holding the last message from the sister she still dreamed about. They were a family. Months passed. Carol got a job at a local bakery. Ellie started school. Thomas would walk her there each morning, waiting at the gates until she waved from the steps. They had dinner together every night, sometimes burned, sometimes late, but always together. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed, Carol looked across the table at Thomas. "You saved us," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You saved yourselves. I just opened the door." But in truth, they had saved him just as much. The silence was gone. The house was alive again. And though the past still visited sometimes, in dreams, in sudden tears, in the sound of Ellie's footsteps running through the hall, it no longer haunted them. It reminded them of what they'd survived, of who they'd become, of Lily and Laura, and love that never dies. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart in any way, please take a moment to subscribe to Stories of Hope, where real moments, powerful emotions, and the resilience of the human spirit come alive through storytelling. We'll see you in the next story.